Welcome back to another episode of Inside the Wave with John Burroughs, Isaac Popper. Today we got a bit of a surprise episode as it was just announced that four teams are joining the Pac-12. Joining Oregon State and Washington State is going to be Colorado State, Fresno State, Boise State, and San Diego State. So Isaac and I are going to talk with you about what that means for Tulane, what the next steps are, and where Tulane might see themselves in a few years. How you doing, Isaac?
Doing well. Thanks, John. We recorded two podcasts yesterday, an interview with Aiden Huntington. Definitely check that out if you haven't already. It was 30 minutes long. He was excellent. And we recorded an Oklahoma game preview as well with Peyton from Through the Keyhole podcast. Thanks, Peyton, for coming on. But here we are with our first emergency podcast. So I feel like we're a true show now, John, now that we're having an emergency pod. Excited to be back with you just a day later.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of exciting. I think the biggest takeaway from all of this is that teams or conferences need to stop naming themselves with numbers because it doesn't make any sense anymore. You got 16 teams in the Big 12, 6 teams in the Pac-12, 18 teams in the Big 10. None of it makes sense anymore. They need to maybe redo some names. I know college football traditionalists won't like this, but it doesn't make sense.
My favorite was when it was the Pac-2 and you could just wipe out the one. It was actually not that bad.
I think my favorite was when there were 12 teams in the Big 10 and 10 teams in the Big 12. That was pretty ironic.
Also good. I mean, maybe my favorite was just when we had 10 in the Big 10 and 12 in the Big 12.
That made too much sense. So some of the things we're going to talk to you all about today. We're going to talk about what this means for Tulane's race to the college football playoffs. We're going to talk about some of the pros to staying in the American. We're going to talk about some of the cons to staying in the American. We're going to talk about pros and cons to leaving the American Conference and where they could end up, not necessarily just the Pac-12, what the moves from other teams that will likely be happening in the near future will mean for Tulane and how that could change Tulane's approach. We're also going to talk about what teams we think could join the Pac-12 next, what some maybe bigger programs are for the Pac-12, what some realistic options are. We're also going to talk about what teams the Pac-12 should pursue next. So we have quite the episode. If you love college football, this is the place to be right now.
Yeah, let's do it. We're still without power here in large parts of uptown New Orleans, as well as downtown, Metairie, Mid-City. Hurricane Francine did make landfall about 60 miles from New Orleans yesterday and did coming here with plenty of flooding, winds. It was a hurricane.
Yeah, I'm glad everyone I know appears to be safe and sending out thoughts and prayers to everyone that was affected by that. I still have a lot of friends in New Orleans, even though I'm abroad in Madrid right now. I have family there, so definitely been thinking about y'all lately. Let's talk some college football, maybe a little distraction from the hurricane. I think we should start with the college football playoff implications, just to clear things up a bit about the group of 5 spot. Technically, there is no group of 5 spot in the college football playoffs. That's just what fans are calling it. The way the 12-team playoff is broken down is that the top 5 conference championships conference champions get a bid to the playoffs. And then after that, the next 7 highest ranked teams go in. Right now, since there's only 4 Power 4, as fans call them, conferences, one of the conference champion spots of the 5 has to go to a group of 5 team. So that's why people are calling that the group of 5 spot. If the Pac-12 becomes another Power 5 conference, then that would mean that the 5 automatic conference championship bids would likely go to the SEC, Big 10, Big 12, ACC, and then the Pac-12. But the Pac-12 isn't very good right now with these 6 teams. So it's definitely something to monitor. If a bunch of powerhouses end up joining some of these big programs, maybe that changes things for Tulane. But that's how it's formatted right now. We talked a little bit, Isaac and I, off of the video about if they would ever consider changing the format, adding an official group of 5 spot somehow. We think what's more likely to happen is that they shift to a 16-team playoff in the next 5 years probably, and then they'll have to rewrite the entire rules. But I don't think that they're going to change the format of the 12-team college football playoff. Do you agree with that, Isaac?
Yeah, I think so, John. That's definitely what I'm seeing from the experts. The Pac-12 as it currently stands with these 6 teams, and if they added 2 teams, maybe from the Mountain West, maybe poached some mid-tier, lower-end American Conference teams, would not be seen as an autonomous 5 conference. It would still be the autonomous 4 or the Power 4, with the Pac-12 being a serious threat, but no guarantee to be getting that 5th conference champion spot.
Yeah, it's also important to point out that the terms Power Five, Power Four, Group of Five, none of those terms are actually official in college sports. Those were created by fans. So that's something interesting to think about too. If you're wondering what the Pac-12 will be classified as, technically it can't be classified as either because those are two arbitrary terms. I think next, Isaac, we should talk about maybe some of the pros to Tulane staying in the American Conference right now, not joining another conference. What do you think some of the pros are for that?
Yeah, John, I'm a big proponent of Tulane staying in the American, at least as in terms of the current landscape. I think that we are lucky to be in a strong conference here with the American Conference. They have a lot of great assets with not only their teams, but also um, the conference itself is a well-run conference. They do things right with media. They have an amazing ESPN package. I'm fortunate to be a statistician, a broadcast statistician, and cameraman on some of these ESPN Plus broadcasts that are part of this large media rights package. It's not just football, but it's basketball, it's volleyball, the occasional tennis game. Um, they're really broadcasting a bunch of sports on ESPN Plus, and that's a lot of revenue dollars for our school's athletic department budget. We're able to have a great control room because of that. And the last thing I want is, to be in a conference where we're on Flow Sports or don't have a serious ESPN package that guarantees whatever it is, 80, 90, 100 games a year. So currently the American Conference is in a good spot. However, if Memphis, South Florida, Tulane, some of these teams are deciding to leave the conference, and that puts the conference in a tough spot and does pose a risk to the conference being able to sign a similar or even better contract. Whereas I think now they could be able to sign a great ESPN media rights deal, even though they lost Houston, UCF, Cincinnati, and SMU. They did a good job bringing some new schools and probably as good of a job as they could have done. Some people wanted them to add schools like Cal and Stanford. That's not what I wanted. I don't want our schools traveling to the West Coast, or I don't want our athletes traveling to the West Coast. I don't want those West Coast Olympic athletes traveling to New Orleans in the middle of their week and having to miss 2 days of school just to play, one beach volleyball game or have one track meet. I just don't think that's fair to the student athletes. I think that there's a way they can compete in their geographical area, and so that's why I'm happy with Tulane in the American Conference right now. Additionally, as I said before, as it currently stands, there is a great path for Tulane to go to the college football playoffs if they do what they need to do and take care of their own business, which means number one, winning on Saturday in Norman, and then taking care of business, winning every single conference game, including the conference championship, which I believe they can do. But if they do that, it should, but not guaranteed, it should be their college football playoff spot. But if things change, that's a different story. So for now, with the goal of winning conference championships, not necessarily being easy, but being attainable, I like that position for Tulane. We just won 2022. We hosted in 2023. I hope and expect us to be hosting and winning in 2024. I think that puts you in a good position to root for something, to start to fill our stadiums on a week-to-week basis.
Yeah, I think it's definitely beneficial for the student athletes right now. The American Conference is, kind of located in that southeastern region. It's really one of two competitive conferences that still make sense geographically. That could all change here in the very near future, but it's really the SEC and the American Conference that makes sense geographically. And funny enough, they happen to be in about the same region of the country. I love how you mentioned the pros to the conference championship, the clear path to the college football playoffs. That's the way it stands right now. All of this is subject to change. I see a lot of people overreacting, saying Tulane needs to go to the Pac-12, Tulane needs to join the ACC. Why? They don't. People are so worried about Tulane getting left behind and what could happen in the future. When if you step back and look at it, Tulane's actually in a really good spot. Any team that hasn't expanded a ton yet, or that is looking to expand would be a better way to say that. Any conference that's looking to expand is going to have Tulane pretty high on their list of teams that they want, given the success and academic reputation Tulane has in recent years. There's no reason to jump into a ship because you're afraid that it's going to take off without you. It's not. Tulane can wait, see what happens, see what unfolds, and make the best decision for Tulane once they have all the information. There's absolutely no reason for Tulane to jump ship before they have all the information, like there may be from some of these other schools that don't have a spot reserved if they want it.
Yeah, there's 13 full members of the conference. So let's say North Texas, Rice, and Memphis jump ship. We're not left behind. There's 9 other good universities with respectable athletics programs, assets, academics in our conference. And then you add in Navy and Army for football as well. And if you care about football, those are 2 good programs. So those are 2 assets that shouldn't be left out of the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely.
That was a good move. Why would Tulane recently by the conference
leave? Why would Tulane leave the American Conference right now when, as it stands, with just the 6 teams in the Pac-12, the American Conference is better than the current Pac-12? If the Pac-12 changes and becomes better, then maybe you reevaluate and leave then. But there's no reason to leave for an inferior conference, which the Pac-12 is as it stands right now. I get that the name has a reputation, but the teams that built that reputation aren't there anymore. I think the biggest thing that could change for Tulane right now, the way I see it in the American Conference, there's kind of a big 3 in terms of competitiveness, at least in football. It's Tulane, Memphis, and UTSA.
With a wild card, I think, of USF. They are clearly pouring money into their program, recruiting at a high level. So I'm curious to see where they land. But at the moment, it's those 3 teams. I wouldn't be surprised if even this season it's actually Memphis, Tulane, and USF. I think right now it's clear just Tulane and Memphis right now for this conference championship.
Yeah, I'm talking about overall. I think Jeff Traylor is an excellent coach at UTSA. They're kind of in a more rebuilding stage right now. They have a younger team, probably going to get killed this Saturday by Texas. But I'm just talking about in terms of where the programs are now. So if those other 2 teams, Memphis and UTSA, left, hypothetically for the Pac-12, that might change things. How do you think that would change things, Isaac? What would you do if you were Tulane in that situation?
I'm not sure. I'd have to see how things land, but I do see it as a big 4 with South Florida included in that conversation. They're taking things seriously, specifically NIL moving in-house, I believe, and pouring a lot of money into their athletics programs.
Yeah, they're good. They're good programs. The way I see it, I think if Memphis and UTSA leave, I'm not as excited about USF right now as you are. But for me, if UTSA and Memphis leave, then I think Tulane has to leave at that point because there just isn't enough competition in the American for Tulane to where they could build a legitimate resume and contend for the college football playoffs. So now I think we should move on and talk about teams that could join the Pac-12 next. Some of the bigger options. Isaac, you have a list of teams that you think the Pac-12 should pursue next, and if I'm understanding correctly, you have them organized in tiers?
Yeah, I've got IPOP's tiers if I was the Pac-12 commissioner.
So how realistic are these options? What kind of framework did you use to decide? I haven't heard these teams yet, so y'all are gonna hear this at the same time I am.
So I made them realistic in the fact that these are all group of 5 teams. The only Power 5 teams or Power 4, autonomous 4 teams I was willing to consider were the 2 teams that felt like the end of the barrel of teams that left the Pac-12, and that's going to be Cal and Stanford, also higher academic programs. The reason I didn't consider them is that the ACC's grant of rights is posing the extreme challenges. ESPN ended up getting them into a 20-year agreement when they formed the ACC network. So it's going to be very hard to move out within the next 9 years for any team, for any school that signed the grant of right. And then also, from what I've read, the experts just don't think it's possible with them just signing on to a new agreement. So I left those two schools out of the conversation. So my first tier, IPOP's top tier, is what you consider the big three, actually: Memphis, Tulane, and UTSA. However, the reason I left South Florida out of the conversation is that they're just a little bit farther from the West Coast, and especially some of those teams in the Northwest, like Oregon State, who's one of the teams, and Washington State, who are the two teams that are really driving this rebuild and working on the Pac, paying $40 million to the Mountain West for those exits. The schools are paying exit fees, but in addition to the agreement that Washington State, Oregon State, Pac-12 made for them to play in the Mountain West for the next 2 years, they're going to owe $40 million for these $10 million apiece for these teams leaving, and then those schools are each going to have to pay an exit fee, probably estimated around $8 million, $10 million, something like that as well. My second tier is some more Mountain West teams that I really like. I think that these teams are both good at basketball and football, which is why I picked them for this tier. Also have some good facilities, UNLV and New Mexico. UNLV is the host of NBA Summer League. I enjoyed going down there for Summer League. And then New Mexico, good program for both basketball and football. And then I include a third team in this tier, and that's USF.
So recap for me real quickly. The tier one teams that you had
Your big
were
three.
who? So USF, Memphis, UTSA. That's interesting to me. I've seen a lot of people talking about teams like Clemson, Louisville, Virginia Tech, Florida State, even Miami. Some of these disgruntled ACC teams. So props to you for not taking the bait. That's not realistic. They're not going to join. I appreciate the realism. Is Tulane going to be in any one of these tiers, or is this excluding Tulane?
Yeah, Tulane, Memphis, and UTSA in my tier one.
Oh, South Florida was in your tier two. That's right.
Sorry, yeah. So if I was Tulane, I wouldn't jump ship, but if I was the Pac-12 commissioner, I would definitely be wanting to add Tulane, wouldn't you?
Oh, absolutely. I think Tulane would be, in terms of realistic options. So anyone that has just locked themselves in to the SEC or the Big Ten isn't moving. American teams could move, but that's unlikely. Or I mean, not American teams. Sorry. ACC teams could move, but it's unlikely. I think out of the realistic options, Tulane's probably the top one.
I agree. I absolutely agree. We just saw Houston, UCF, Cincinnati move. Those were all good football teams at the time, especially with Cincinnati in the college football playoff. Then we saw
At the
SMU.
time.
They won the conference championship, but we won the conference championship the year before. We hosted them last year. We won the Cotton Bowl, and we've got a great athletics department. We have a new AD in David Harris, who's putting things in the right direction. There's a lot of talented teams at the lower level as well. One of the best bowling teams in the country was ranked all of last season. One of the best sailing teams, national champions 2 years ago, 3 years ago. Baseball back-to-back conference champions right there. That's not even a lower level sport that doesn't get paid attention to. That's a ticketed sport. We've got cross country girls just won the conference championship. A lot of sports are on the rise. A lot of coaches are on the rise. Beach volleyball was second in CUSA. They went to the finals with mostly freshmen starting, so that's a program on the rise. Women's tennis just brought in 3 5-star recruits. I think that this organization is definitely suited for the Power Five.
Yeah, they're definitely capable. It's more of a matter of how much more would it benefit us if we joined, and would it benefit us? So that's tier one, tier two. How many tiers do you have? 4?
I've got 4. You ready for tier 3?
Hit me.
So I've got 2 more Mountain West teams and then 2 American teams. I've got Air Force and San Jose State, who suck at basketball, and I'm a basketball guy. However, great football programs, especially Air Force. Air Force was somebody that people really thought might sneak into the New Year's Six last year. They just couldn't stop winning. And then I've got two teams in the American Conference, North Texas and Rice. I think North Texas is a pretty good football team, and Rice is maybe respectable, but not as good. And probably the same would go for basketball for both of those two. I would give it the same descriptions. But Rice is a great academic institution, so that kind of uplifts it a little bit for me. And then I think the geography of those two schools being in Texas, Rice in a good area, North Texas not being far from Dallas, makes it a good option for the California schools if they're going to, California dominated, West Coast dominated conference, if they're going to look a little bit eastward.
Yeah, it's a solid list of schools. I've been looking at it through more of a football lens because that seems to be what is driving most of the conference realignment. It's obviously the biggest revenue generating sport. But interesting that you mentioned basketball because new Pac-12 member San Diego State, I believe, played for a national championship in basketball in 2023 against UConn. So there could be some basketball implications as well.
Yeah, they do. And so that addition makes it, I would call it a cancel out comparison when you're evaluating San Diego State and Florida Atlantic for me. When you're looking at does Tulane need to switch conferences and get out of the American? I think if you're going from a basketball perspective, that cancels it out. And then, the Mountain West does have a lot of other good teams for basketball, but the American currently as constructed has better teams for football. So debate how you want with that. And then my tier 4, so that's my top 10. And then my tier 4 includes 3 more, I guess the last 3 teams in the Mountain West. Utah State, who was excellent at basketball. They won the conference in the regular season last year. Wyoming, respectable. Nevada, also respectable. And then 2 wild cards who I've seen briefly mentioned on social media as potential ads. I don't like them from a location standpoint, but they're great football teams, and that's what this is about. Liberty and Appalachian State. So that's coming from the East Coast, Virginia, North Carolina. But that, again, if we're going football, those are 2 teams. Appalachian State for a long time was one of the top teams in the so-called group of 5. And then Liberty is the team that would have made the college football playoff if it had existed last year. And quite honestly, will probably go undefeated again, given their really, really soft schedule. Hope I didn't offend any Liberty fans on here, but I would be disappointed if they didn't go undefeated considering how bad that schedule is.
Well, I definitely hope they drop at least one because there's an argument if they go undefeated, even with the weak schedule, they deserve to get into the college football playoffs for the group of 5 spot just for going undefeated. If Tulane beats Oklahoma, I disagree with that, but I don't want the controversy of that argument out there. So explain to me then the difference between your tiers and how you separated them. What makes a team tier 2 instead of tier 1 or tier 2 instead of tier 3?
So the biggest driving force for me was football. I think it's clear as day. Tulane, Memphis, UTSA. When you take schedule into account, those should be the top 3 group of 5 teams. They're getting a lot of the top votes right now, but just from a consistency basis, obviously Tulane's is a little bit nearsighted as they had that 2-10 season, but in the grand scheme of things, they were undefeated in '98, founding member of the SEC. They have an SEC championship. It's a legitimate football program, and it's hard to see now that they're in their second, now that they're riding high, haven't won too many games, but look like they're in a great position with a second coach and not just Willie Fritz. It's really hard to leave Tulane out of that top tier in terms of football. As you said, UTSA, Jeff Traylor. We'll see if they can do it without Frank Harris, who was there for like 6-7 years. But they probably should be able to. And then Memphis is always in the conversation. They've been in the conversation for, at least 25 years at this point, of being a team that has the resources at the very least to be a Power 5 team.
Yeah, you mentioned Tulane and the SEC championships. They actually have 3 SEC championships, which is more than about half of the current SEC schools. So, make sure you rub that into an Oklahoma fan this weekend that Tulane has more SEC championships than Oklahoma right now. Tulane having 3, Oklahoma having 0, of course. It's their first year in the SEC. Tulane actually won those titles in 1934, 1939, and 1949. That's actually a great segue into what could be the next topic, which is what if Tulane joins another conference other than the Pac-12? What if Memphis, UTSA leave for the Pac-12? Tulane decides they need to get out of the American with those losses, and they go elsewhere.
Well, the ACC is obviously a possibility, John. We'll have to see what happens with the grant of rights. And FSU and the ACC are in currently 4 different lawsuits suing each other. So if FSU and maybe Clemson end up jumping out of the ACC for another conference, personally, I don't think either of those two schools are the programs that they used to be. They used to be 2 of the best teams in college football, no doubt about it. But I don't think that FSU should even be ranked right now, and I don't think that Clemson is better than, arguably not even better than Tulane right now. We'll see, but Tulane just hung with Kansas State, who's ranked 14 this week. Obviously, as all Tulane fans know, they think they should have won that game against a team that's now ranked 14. Oklahoma's ranked 15. We know, you and I both know that they're going to go in and hang this Saturday. So if FSU and Clemson do jump ship, then that could open up spots. The ACC was a little preemptive and just added Cal and Stanford when they had the opportunity to, especially for the academics. So I don't know that they're actually going to be looking to add teams, but if they do want to add teams, Tulane's in that conversation with academics, and they're a better school at pretty much all sports than Rice, who just moved into the American Conference. So I feel like Tulane's a no-brainer for the ACC, especially considering geography, if they're going to add a team. I just don't think that's going to happen within the next 7 to 9 years.
Yeah, so I was looking at each conference. I don't think the SEC and Big Ten are on the table. If they were, I wouldn't want it. I think that would set Tulane back. I love Tulane. Right now, Tulane is one of the fastest growing programs in college football. I don't think we're in a position to contend for an SEC championship or a Big Ten championship right now. I don't think I'm shocking anyone from saying that. I don't think that they're looking to add Tulane. I don't think Tulane is looking to go there. I don't think the relationship makes sense. The conferences that could look to add Tulane are the ACC, as you mentioned, which I'm interested in. It's a little all over the place geographically, but I like the teams Tulane would play a lot better than the SEC and the Big Ten. We talk about the Pac-12. The other team that would probably make a run after Tulane is the Big 12. I cannot emphasize how against joining the Big 12 I am.
Especially after those refs, John.
Oh my God, and it's nothing new. I've said it before. I think it's the most poorly run conference in college football. I think a lot of that has to do with the commissioner, Brett Yormark. I'm not a fan of his. I'm not shocking anyone by saying that. The Big 12 seems like a bit of a clown show to me. I do not want to associate with that. Cannot say that enough. So if Tulane leaves the American, it really comes down to the Pac-12 is probably the most likely option, and then the ACC. I think before we sign off really quickly, I want to talk about the most realistic options for who the next teams are to join the Pac-12. And this isn't coming from me. These are actually the betting odds. There's actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's 7 teams that have odds, and this is in order to be the next teams to join the Pac-12. The first one is UNLV, and the second one is Nevada. Those 2 teams have odds higher than anyone else by a significant margin. After that, it's a tie between Tulane and Memphis, and then just shortly behind is UTSA. And then, funny enough, the only other 2 teams that have odds, you already mentioned, Isaac, about how while the fit makes sense geographically, financially, it actually doesn't with the contract. The 2 other teams that have the next best odds of joining the Pac-12 are Stanford and California. So, that just goes to show that Vegas doesn't necessarily make its odds based off realism. It makes its odds off what it thinks people are going to bet. But I just thought, that list is interesting to read. I think UNLV and Nevada are the no-brainers. Probably will be the next ads if I had to guess. And then after that, it's probably Tulane, Memphis, and UTSA's decision, and we'll see what happens there. But that's a ways away.
Hold on. So a 2-10 team in the Mountain West, it's got the second best odds. Did I hear you correctly, John? Nevada.
I think right now with all the conference realignment that's happened lately, the top suitors might be off the table. I think it could be slim pickings for the Pac-12 right now, unfortunately.
I had UNLV as my number one team in the Mountain West. Great team in both football and basketball, great facilities, first-class organization. But I had New Mexico as my other team from the Mountain West in Tier 2. And if I was them, I understand the geography, but I would definitely try to poach Memphis and Tulane and UTSA.
Yeah, I think those will definitely be their next phone calls. They've probably already had some phone calls. I don't know that Tulane, Memphis, and UTSA are going to be as willing to jump to the Pac-12 as maybe UNLV or Nevada would be, and that probably explains why they're a little higher and the odds there. It's not which one would be better for the Pac-12, but I guess which one's more realistic for the Pac-12.
Absolutely agree. So I guess I'm just surprised that New Mexico isn't a little bit higher, but certainly makes sense with UNLV. And then the American Conference schools a little bit behind. Nevada did play close with SMU. It was a 5-point game, and SMU is now in the ACC and beat us in the conference championship game.
Yeah, yeah. Don't remind me. Appreciate that. Appreciate that,
Sorry,
Isaac. I
it
always
hurts me
love
too.
looking back on.
I wasn't a student when we got to rush the field. I was over in Madrid like you are now, so I understand.
Yeah, well, I think that's gonna do it for this episode. This little surprise episode, some breaking news today. I'm excited for part two of this. Whenever the next teams that join the Pac-12 are announced, there will be more teams because the Pac-12 currently has 6 teams, and according to the NCAA rules, you actually cannot have a conference with 6 teams. So they will be adding more teams. It's not a matter of if; it's a matter of when, or maybe it falls apart altogether. Either way, there will be more news. Could be Tulane, could not be Tulane. We'll have more answers in the future. I'm looking forward to that.
Looking forward to it too, John. And I hope that all of our listeners can drop their opinions in the comments. Who do you think that the Pac-12 should add, and who do you think that they will add? Make sure to like and
Yeah,
subscribe and check out our previous videos from yesterday if you haven't already. Aiden Huntington and Oklahoma preview with Through the Keyhole podcast. This is Peyton.